Working Cows Podcast, episode 275. And this episode is brought to you by the Ranching for Profit School.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals studios. And you'll be hearing more about the partnership that we're developing between C90 Ocean Minerals and the Working Cows Podcast. But for now, I wanted to tell you about the sponsor for today's episode. Yeah, that's right. You heard me say at the beginning of the episode, we're sponsored by the Ranching for Profit School for the next couple of episodes. If you've listened to the Working Cows Podcast much, you've most certainly heard mention of the Ranching for Profit School. The fact is that many of the guests of the program have attended Ranching for Profit, and the experience has been impactful on shaping the way that they see the ranching business. My wife and I attended, and we found it to be an incredible experience. Bottom line is, if you're in the ranching business, you need to go. Ranching for Profit is the Masters of Business Administration for ranchers. It is a must attend for anyone who makes their living in agriculture or anyone who wants to make the transition to farming and ranching as their profession. At the time of this recording in early January, most of their upcoming schools are full, but there is room in the Rapid City, South Dakota, and Grand Forks, North Dakota schools in late January and early February. Visit their website to see a full schedule of the upcoming schools at ranchingforprofit.com. Very excited to be joined today by Steve Kenyon. Of course, Steve's been a guest multiple times on the Working Cows Podcast, always has great insights about the grazing side, the business side, all aspects, all the pillars of the ranching operations. And he frequently, when I've had him on, makes mention of the fact that his biggest expense is labor and equipment. And that is an out-of-the-box challenge, or an out-of-the-box way of thinking, a paradigm-challenging practice is what I was trying to say there. And so I wanted to have Steve on to talk about what exactly is he paying himself? How is it that labor and equipment is his biggest expense? Because I think that is something that you learn at the Ranching for Profit School that most people don't think about in agriculture, is paying themselves a fair wage of what it would cost to replace themselves if they were laid up, or if just making sure that you're getting paid for the work you're putting in. So I invited Steve to come on and talk about that with us here today on the Working Cows Podcast. Steve, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here again.
Earlier you had a Zoom background of a goat, and now it's cows. I see. I didn't know if you had a different audience in mind for the goat background or not, but
I did. I just did another a Zoom meeting this morning, and some lady started talking about she wants to buy goats someday. So I quickly switched it to my goat picture.
I see.
I figured for this, I better switch it back to Working Cows Podcast.
Yep. Well, I think that there's at least a working small ruminants podcast that could be started, if not a working sheep podcast and a working goats podcast, if anybody's wanting to. I don't have any copyrights on the working blank podcast naming rights or anything like that. So
yeah, I might take the working pasture pigs podcast one. I might go to that one.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. I'll listen. Anyways, so one of the things that you have said, I think maybe every time that I've talked to you on the podcast, and I've heard you say in other contexts, is that your biggest expense is labor and equipment, or what you pay yourself. And I think that there's a paradigm challenging practice there of actually paying yourself. You know, I mean, a lot of ranchers subsidize their ranch with free labor. They couldn't pay somebody else to do what they do if they got sick or injured. And so I have been thinking about that as a potential episode for quite a while, and I decided let's pull the trigger and actually get it done. So tell me about how you think about paying yourself, labor and equipment, those kinds of things on your ranch.
Yeah, labor and equipment is a huge cost on most ranches, and most people don't see it. right? It's not included in their numbers. They don't understand it. And I think that's, goes back from when I was a teenager. I was trained that you can't pay yourself on a farm, right? You can't account for that. I remember, growing up and my dad talking about, you go out and you need an off-farm job, and, you're not just, you're not going to be able to make a living at this. So you got to get something else. And it never made sense to me, right? Why would we have to do that? And I remember going over to my neighbors one time. I just started getting my first group of cattle together. Was going over to get some chop from him, right? He was grinding up some barley and oats, and I was supposed to feed my purebred bulls that I just bought. Supposed to feed them grain twice a day. So, of course, I've learned better since then, but that was the story at the time. And I remember going over there and I was explaining to him that, I'm really happy with the price that you're giving. This is just to my neighbor, right? My dad's friend. Really, happy with the price you're giving, even with all my labor and equipment of me coming over here with the truck and, helping you grind it all up and putting in my labor. It's still cheaper to get the grain from you than it is to go to the feed mill and just have them dump it in my truck and come out. So I'm happy with this. And he just scoffed at me. Oh, you can't include your labor in this. Don't be ridiculous, right? It was just this mentality that was pushed into me. And then, of course, I wanted to, graduated from grade 12 and wanted to get back on the farm, but I need to go get this off-farm job first. So, okay, I'm going to go to university for a while and try and figure this out. And went to college and learned a little bit about agriculture. And I was, what am I going to do other than farming to make my farming work? And it was so frustrating to me. And I got out of college, or during college, I was driving an oil filled truck and doing all sorts of other things. And I remember one week I was driving a truck, delivering oil back and forth. I think I was working, 16 to 18-hour days, 7 days a week sometimes, right? It was just go, go, go. I think there was a little fewer rules back then than there is now. It was some crazy times. And I remember one day, because I had to feed these bulls twice a day, got to give them grain. And I fed them when I got home from work. And then I got up in the morning and went back to work and I fed them again. And I stood there with the pail in my hand. I remember standing there in the chop bin going, you know what? I just fed these bulls 4 hours ago. And here I am feeding them again because I'm working 18-hour days, right? So I'm like, this is not right. Something's wrong here. So I started looking at labor and equipment and all the time into it. And then I remember taking a Ranching for Profit course and a holistic management course and got into this and realized that, you know what? We need to include labor and equipment costs. Most people don't. They purposely ignore it. They push it out. It's one of the biggest, what's the term they use? Unpaid labor. Mm-hmm. The term that one, I despise that term. And, the economic calculations the government gives out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's a value for unpaid labor. Why is it unpaid? Right? Like, it just makes no sense to me now looking back. But that's what was trained in me. Right. It was pushed and pushed and pushed the whole time through. So when was it? About 2005, I was able to quit my off-farm job, went full-time farming. And because I'm a custom grazer, just a little background on myself a little bit here. I do custom grazing. I bring in other people's cattle. I graze on other people's land, leased land. So I don't actually own the land and I don't own the animals. But a custom grazer, that's only 6 months out of the year. Right? Am I going to make a living for 12 months out of working for 6 months? No. So I always had to have something else. To begin with, it was driving a truck to help me get going with it. I went from full-time trucking down to part-time trucking for a while. By, I think in 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, I brought in a herd of cattle for the winter on a custom basis. So now it gave me more income, more work, more. We were bale grazing or swath grazing. So that's the other half of my income in a year, but I always included my labor and equipment costs. So that has kind of faded down a little bit more. I'm doing a little bit more speaking and teaching, and we're building a advanced grazing system course for all across Canada right now. So there's more work involved in that. So I don't need the cattle so much in the winter anymore because I have the other 6 months of income, right? It's another profit center that I've developed that I don't need the cattle in the winter anymore. That being said, I've got a protege coming underneath right now, and he's taking over hopefully the management or much more of the management of the ranch. and I brought a herd of cattle in for him, so he has some wintertime work, right? So it's just backed me up 20 years. Right now, I'm showing him, well, this is what you got to do. Custom grazing is only 6 months of the year. You need something else in the winter, right? He's going to calve out a herd of cattle this year. So, but paying yourself for that labor, you really see it when you're a custom guy. And your customers really see it when they're custom people too. All of a sudden, they got this extra bill that they didn't have before. So that's something you really got to communicate with them as well. But it is a very important part of my business. Whenever I'm doing any budgeting, I have to put in labor and equipment costs. Now, some people call it yardage. Mine is a from the hip yardage. Okay, it's not perfect. I'm a D personality. That's in the DISC assessment test. I'm a very dominant personality. I don't care as long as it's close, right? I want the result. I don't care how we got there. So there's other personalities that there's no way this would work. They want to know the exact penny of what it cost them. I'm not quite so. So I've had some criticisms on my from the hip yardage cost, but what I'm including in that is my labor, so the man hours that are put into it, and whatever piece of equipment you're using. And what I usually try and compare to is another industry with a similar piece of equipment for value. Okay, so a rubber tired backhoe, okay, it might bill out at $150 an hour, which includes an operator. So is the operator worth $25 an hour and the machine worth $125 an hour? Right? I mean, whatever. Is that comparable to a tractor and a silage wagon, or a tractor and a bale buster, or a tractor and a post pounder? Right? So my pickup, okay, what is it worth? Well, it's an older pickup. You know, I don't have huge payments on it. Repair bills can add up on it after a while, but I think right now I'm sitting at about $65 or $75 an hour for the driver and the pickup to go out and do something. Okay, so it's not perfect. Is that actually what my opportunity cost, my depreciation, my fuel, my oil, my repairs? Is that actually what it costs? Probably not. But it's also including what I look at as a equipment profit center is the term I use. So I pretend almost like my equipment is its own profit center where I could rent it from the farm, right? So if you had a tractor, for example, your hay operation could rent it from the equipment profit center and use it for so many hours at such a rate. And you could start determining if that tractor was worthwhile owning or not. Right? And then when the cows actually use the tractor to feed, well, they would technically on paper rent it from the equipment profit center, and you'd start to see the value of that tractor and what it's worth in every profit center. Oh, I didn't realize that my cows use that tractor way more than my hay profit center, or vice versa, right? Depending on the farm, depending on the situation. So starting to put a value to that is a huge asset in your, I think you said at the beginning, it's a mindset switch. Because my mindset before was you can't pay yourself labor. The government bodies that come out and say, well, this unpaid labor that you don't really get, but we're going to put a value to it, right? That just that terminology, it's in your mindset. Oh, here's a value, but you don't get it. Right? Like, what? Why can't I get it? I did the work.
Yep.
So that's been frustrating to me over the years, is this idea that we can't pay ourselves. So every profit center that I put it in now, I put in an hourly rate, just a flat rate for whatever piece of equipment. If you've got an ATV, okay, what's it worth? Is the driver worth $20 an hour and the piece of equipment worth $30 an hour? Okay, so $50 an hour. It takes me 4 hours to check the fence at $50. That's how much it costs me, right? Divided by the number of animals or the number of acres or however you want to work that out. But that's always going into my budgets all the time. And if that budget's showing me that I'm not making a profit at it, well, I adjust it, change it, or don't do it.
I think what we're talking about here is the difference between economics and finance. Like, economics is, am I generating an economic profit? Is there a return on the asset that I have, a positive return on the asset? There's always a return. Sometimes it's negative, but is there a positive return on the assets that I have? And then that is a separate conversation from finances. Finances is, does it cash flow? You know, economics is it profitable? Finance is, how do we pay for it? And I think a lot of times we have hidden the economic profit. We don't even, that's just not even a question for people in agriculture, whether or not we're economically profitable. All they're worried about is cash flow. do I have enough money to do it again next year? Are they going to send the trucks and pick up the cows? Is the bank going to call the note in, or do I have enough money to do it next year? And so I think that's kind of the difference, the paradigm shift, the mindset shift that we're talking about here, is that you might be cash flow positive, but economically you're eating up equity over time. There's going to come a day of reckoning with a business that is only cash flow positive and not generating an economic profit. There's going to come a day of reckoning where you will not be able to do this, or maybe a future generation won't be able to do this anymore because we have given away all that equity over time. Is that match up with your experience or what you've seen over the time?
Yes, exactly. The difference between economics and finances is a huge misunderstanding that a lot of people have. I remember one of my exchange students came years ago, came out and worked, and I taught him how to bale graze and how to cross fence and grazing, and we were calving cows and all the things that we did on a ranch that he learned, because he came, he was pretty green. And he spent a couple of years with us on and off. And I got to see him again. I actually got invited to his wedding down in Bogota, Colombia, a couple of years ago, 2018, I believe. And he said to me then, I went down and got to visit with him. He said, the most important thing that I learned from you, Steve, the most important thing. And I'm thinking, okay, was it the bale grazing? Was it, what most people would take away from, right? He said, the most important thing was that there is a difference between economics and finances. I didn't know. I thought it was just money, right? But that's a huge thing that people don't get. So bankers are always pushing finances, right? Where we're in this mindset now that in agriculture that we got to keep the banker happy. So that's all that matters. Well, in the long run, if you go broke, it doesn't really matter, right? Or you got to work off farm and you've got all this unpaid labor that you're putting into it, and you never get to see your family because you're out there working and not getting paid. We've got to get that mindset that there's two sides to our the dollar in our business.
And one of my favorite stories about that is a story that Roland Cruz tells, and he tells a story about a guy that who he came in and helped him get his grazing plan all set up and get his infrastructure all set up with paddock designs and water and fencing and all that stuff, and so that they could run more cows. I think maybe even doubled the number of cows they were running. And he tells a story about walking into this ranching conference, and where Roland was a speaker, and this guy who he'd helped was either a guest or just whatever, happened to be there. And he comes into the bar after the conference and he sits down next to this guy, and the guy doesn't really even acknowledge him. And I'm like, well, Roland's like, well, I helped you double the amount of cows you could run. The least you could say is hello, and the guy turns to him after about a few minutes and he says, Roland, I want you to thank you for helping me go broke ranching. And he's like, what? He's like, what do you mean? Yeah, I went broke. He's like, but we doubled the number of cows. Yeah, we did, but I had a bad business model. And so all doubling the amount of cows I could run did for me was help me go broke faster, Yeah. And so I think that's just a really good example of what we're talking about here is, we need to make sure that we've got both sides, as you say, of that dollar accounted for, and make sure that both sides are generating positive return.
Yeah. One of the stories I talk about or tell is about how to make a business repeatable, right? Your most successful businesses are franchises because they're repeatable. Someone's figured out the economics behind it. They've figured out the finances behind it, and you buy that business model from them. They get a little kickback from it, and then it runs, and they're 90% successful. Okay. So on a farm, we need to make it repeatable. So by repeatable, what I mean is, if you were to buy another farm very similar to the one you have, hire someone to manage it, would it still make a profit that could kick back to you as the owner, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a repeatable business? Would the new manager make a living, right? The business make enough profit to pay you more than just the wage that you're getting on your ranch, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem right now with a lot of family farms, is because of the structure that they've been, all of the subsidies that we've had in agriculture, right? We've got inheritance, land appreciation, unpaid labor, off farm income, and what else did I say? Missing one. Anyway, all of those subsidies. Yeah, all of those subsidies that are boosting it up. Now, the difference between economics and finances, okay, over those years, government subsidy too, direct government subsidy. Yeah. Over those years, we've put in and built up capital. So mom and dad, right, the mom and pop farm, they now own their land, right? They've worked hard for it, right? They worked off farm jobs, and the land has increased, and grandpa passed away, and you got an extra, $50,000 to throw into the farm, and now it's paid for. The equipment's paid for. Most of the herd is paid for. Financially, mom and dad are secure, right? They've got money coming in. They can buy a new pickup. They can go out and take a holiday. Now, is it repeatable? Can the next generation come in, buy that entire operation off mom and dad at a reasonable value? I mean, mom and dad might give you a deal, but if you were to buy it even at the deal, can the next generation run the farm the same way with all those payments? Because mom and dad have no payments now. So, that money for the pickup that you bought and the vacation that you went on is now going from the next generation is now going to payments, right? And they probably don't have enough of. So now he's got to get an off-farm job to put more money into it to try and make those payments. So mom and dad is comfortable. They don't need to change. But the next generation right now in it needs to understand economics and finances, or else they're going to, fall flat in their face.
Yep. And I want to just go back and review what you just said, because I think it's important that we need to see these things, if they're not being accounted for, we need to see them as a subsidy to a business that probably isn't sustainable, because that's ultimately what you're talking about. Is a repeatable business is one that's actually sustainable, because we could send somebody else somewhere else to do the same thing we're doing now. They would get paid, and I would get some return from that as well. And some of these subsidies you were talking about are inherited land and inherited money is a subsidy to your business. Appreciation of the assets that you have is a subsidy to your business. The subsidies you get from the government is a subsidy to your business. Unpaid labor is a subsidy to your business. If you aren't approaching this as we're talking about, those are all subsidies that help you, maybe in an economically unprofitable business, maintain a cash flow positive business. You might still have more money in the bank at the end of the year than you started with after all the bills are paid. That's just cash flow. That's not economics. All these other things are taking into account economics. Yeah.
And one other little subsidy that people don't realize, it's kind of an inherited subsidy, is you get to use mom and dad's tractor or their equipment, right? You didn't actually buy the equipment. You're not actually renting it from them. You just get to use it and put in your crop or feed your cows or whatever. So that is another subsidy that, again, if we're putting an hourly rate on that tractor, you might not actually pay it to mom and dad, but if you put the hourly rate on it at, $120 an hour or whatever you pick, right? Whatever's in your environment.
Whatever your from the hip number is.
Yeah, exactly. Then when you're doing your budgeting, that's in there. If you're not making a profit at it, you are accounting for that subsidy, because the problem is, if you don't account for these extra little subsidies that you throw in there, let's say your business is running along good and you run your numbers and you're making a profit. Just like your friend there, you decide to expand. Let's do more of this. This is doing so well. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden you do more of it. Well, the added animals don't get the perk or the little subsidy, and all of a sudden their margin is negative, whereas in your numbers, because you didn't count that, yours are positive. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden that part of the profit center is going to go broke. Okay, we have to. That's why we throw in all the extra numbers, even if they're not really there financially, and in your cash flow, throw them in there. That's what we talk about, opportunity cost, right? Opportunity rent, right? You don't actually have to pay rent on that land because you own it. And it's mom and dad paid for it, and now you don't have to pay anything for it. You inherited it. Well, we put an opportunity rent on there because if you were to expand and do it somewhere else, that would be a cost. So we're going to make sure we account for that to make sure that business could be repeatable.
Yeah. So one of the other things that you mentioned in this conversation is the fact that you're charging your truck out at $75 per hour for truck and driver. And that brings to my mind Robert Kiyosaki's way of thinking about assets and liabilities. He wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he says, an asset is anything that puts money into my pocket, and a liability is anything that takes money out of my pocket. So on your accountant's balance sheet, your truck is probably an asset, but that's not the way Robert Kiyosaki thinks about it. What he's saying is that truck is, I'm using it as a tool to make more money. That's why it's an asset. Not because it's worth something intrinsically, but because it's a tool for making more money. It's an asset. And so I think that is a helpful way of thinking about these things and about whether or not we're paying ourselves is the labor and equipment. It's a tool for making more money. It's an asset, but we need to make sure that we're charging it out fairly so that it actually does generate a return.
Yeah. I mean, some assets that people buy are actually the opposite, because they don't make them any money and they depreciate in value, right? I mean, the boat that's in the shed, right? That's not an asset by any means. There's no way that's appreciating. That's depreciating, and it costs you money. It's fun, but so yeah, that again, it's a mindset thing, an asset, right? Oh, that's a good thing. Well, not necessarily. It's losing you money in the long run. Yeah. Not that I'm putting down boats or anything.
Right.
I'm actually, I want to buy a boat. I had one and I sold it, so now I want another one.
Yeah, that's a human resources thing, right?
Exactly.
It's a reward for the employees of the business.
Yes, exactly.
You mentioned being a D personality and your hip figures. You're from the hip figures on what you're actually charging for labor and equipment, and I think that's another thing that we can miss the forest for the trees sometimes. Is if you spend hours and hours agonizing over balancing your checkbook down to the penny, what did the penny you found when you got it to balance to the penny? What did the penny you found cost you in hours of labor? That's the D personality. Like, okay, we're close enough. I don't want to spend dollars looking for dimes here. We're $75 an hour for truck and driver. We're close enough. Is it 125 or is it 60? We're close enough.
Yeah. Get it relative. I mean, this is for you, right? These are numbers for you and for your business to be successful. Be honest with yourself, right? You could charge, my old pickup truck, it's probably $50 an hour, right? It doesn't do much. If I was to buy a new one, it'd be 75, right? So, be honest with yourself. If you're going to cheat, you're only going to cheat yourself. So get it close. The example that I've used in the past is I remember I had a friend who we were both doing a winter swath grazing project, right? We were both kind of young and gung-ho into this. And I remember I went through my numbers and threw in my labor and equipment for my truck. I think back then I was $50 or something an hour for my truck as well. And ran through the whole thing and made sure it would work. And I charged according to that. As accounting for opportunity cost and depreciation, my labor and everything that was in there. Well, it was a bad year. We had a bit of a wreck. Both of us had the same problems. We ended up having to quit early. There was too much snow and freezing rain and ice. And I remember there was about 60 acres that I just couldn't get to. I ended, and then it cost me even more in the spring because I had to go out and mow them. Because this is some grain farmer's field where now there's swaths out there that he doesn't want swaths, right? So I went out with a mower and, borrowed. That was one of those subsidy things that I had in my farm back then. Borrowed a tractor and rented a mower, and I went out there and buzzed these up. And so it cost me extra time and labor. In the end, though, he didn't budget for his equipment. He was just looking for his labor. Okay, so if I didn't quite get paid as much as I wanted because there was extra costs, right? It ended up, if I'm looking to get paid $50 an hour for my labor and equipment. Okay, well, my profit disappeared above that. Now, if I didn't get paid $50 for my equipment, maybe I got paid $40 or $30. I didn't cover my opportunity cost, didn't cover my depreciation, right? Well, maybe I didn't cover my repairs, but I wasn't out there for half the season. So did I actually financially have as many repairs, right? Probably not. But I still got paid. I still got my personal wage out of it because I set the bar a little bit higher because I was accounting for all those extra things. When it didn't happen, we had a wreck. I still fed my family, right? I just didn't cover those, invisible costs that I say are very, very important, but I still fed my family. Like, he went broke. He had to get a loan from his family, and it was a wreck to him. And all of a sudden he had no money coming in whatsoever. So, just a little bit of it. There's that financial thing again, right? I was budgeting higher. If I would have gone just at, paying myself $20 an hour for that whole session and forgot about the piece of equipment that I was driving, well, I would have been in the same boat. I wouldn't have been feeding my family that winter. Okay. So, I guess that's just a little bit of a realistic story that it can actually happen, right?
No,
So,
I appreciate that. I'm not sure if it's in your book, Calendar of the Year-Round Grazer, or not, but I've heard you talk about the economics of mob grazing, like multiple moves per day, that the reason that doesn't work for you is because of this labor and equipment piece, is paying yourself for the actual trip out there to move them multiple times a day. It just doesn't work economically. Is that right? Is that how you think about it?
yeah, you bet. I mean, it depends on the situation, right? I'm not going against mob grazing, because mob grazing works, right? I know the value, the benefit to the land, the improvement of pasture and everything like that. But it depends on the situation of the farm and the farmer. I just actually did a presentation for the CFGA here not too long ago, and I went through a economic calculation on one pasture that changed over the years. Okay, so I took it over about, 17, 18 years ago now, and it was a smaller piece, right? To me, it was mostly bush. So it was 500 acres, but it was mostly bush. So in my mind, the production value of that wasn't very high. We could put about 100 bred heifers down there, but it was 25 miles away. Okay, one, it's a lot of bush. Two, it's a long distance away. So my travel time down and back really added up. I worked out through my pasture calculator. I've got a little economic calculator that I can provide for anybody that wants it. Either it's whatever. It's just a little spreadsheet. It's not a big deal. But I run that through there, and I figured out that I could only move twice a week, right? For the amount of labor and equipment to drive down there and back, I planned my whole rotation to be moving twice a week. That way I could still make a profit. I could cover my costs. When I tried to move every day, my labor and equipment costs went too high, and all of a sudden I was not making a profit on that pasture. Okay, so I say there's an economic threshold somewhere between the amount of time and labor you put into it versus the benefit you get out of it. There's an economic threshold where you can make a profit at it or not. So kind of did that example, and then I switched over. I got some more land down there about 5 years ago. Another 3.5 quarters of mostly open land that produced fairly well. All of a sudden, that completely changed my economics. I went from 100 bred heifers to 500 bred heifers. Okay. Now, all of a sudden, I run my numbers. Obviously, we're bigger paddocks, more water sites, more costs involved in it, but I threw all that in there. And now, all of a sudden, moving every day was not a problem. Right? Actually, probably moving twice a day, I could get away with it and improve the land that much faster. But it doesn't matter if I improve the land faster if I'm going to go broke doing it and lose the land. Right? So there's sometimes baby steps. So, but I showed the whole analogy between the two scenarios, the thought process that went through the whole thing over time. Like, I was just about ready to give up that piece of land because I couldn't get any more with it. And then all of a sudden, boom, it just worked. And now I can go down there every day. So that's an important part too, you bet. It depends on your environment a lot too. What is the cost of your labor? Okay, I got to spend some time with Alejandro Carrillo out of Mexico this spring. I met him down in Denver, and just throwing ideas back and forth and asking about his operation. And he had planned, I don't know if this actually happened, but at the time he said his grazing plan was to graze 800 paddocks on a once-over rotation. Right? From my context, 800 paddocks, like, wow, that's a lot of moves, right? But then you got to think back, okay, what's his context? And the labor for that, right? For me to move 800 paddocks once over, boy, that manpower put into that. So my context is I got to hire someone for $35 an hour, right? That's going to cost a lot of money to hire someone to do that. The other context is I've got a 4.5 month growing season. He's got 365.
Yeah.
Okay, 365 with 800. Well, that's only 2 to 3 moves a day. Okay, that makes a big difference, right? But when he first hit me with that, it's like 800. Oh my gosh, how could I ever do that? Right? My labor and equipment costs would be through the roof. But the other advantage he has, very cheap labor down there compared to where we're at, right? So it all depends. I'm not against the mob grazing. Some people think that I am. I'm not. I want to make sure that we find that economic threshold to be able to make sure that we're profitable while we do it.
Yeah. And to your point about his labor costs, the people that he has working for him to accomplish that are ecstatic to have the job they have, and it's making a real difference in the life of their family to get paid what he's paying them, even though we couldn't find anybody to do it for that in our neighborhood. So I don't, it's not like he's cheating people. It's just,
it's just a different environment.
Right.
I don't know much about the Mexican labor, costs and stuff, but I have been to Colombia a few times, and they talked about the minimum labor down there to hire someone to go and do fencing. It worked out to equivalent to $250 a day $250 a month Canadian is minimum wage. It's like, wow, what a difference in like at that rate. I'd be mob grazing everything up here, right? I'd have people out there moving fence like every 2 hours, and they'd be doing all sorts of stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. So how do you figure that? Is it based on the productivity of the pasture, distance to the pasture, and all those things are kind of coming into play there?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a pasture calculator that kind of throws everything in there. The biggest ones, your fencing costs, your watering cost, your spring setup labor can be high depending on a lot of different things. And then the biggest one by far, or the two biggest ones by far, is your actual grazing labor. And in my environment, also my land rent. Okay, so those are kind of the big five that I run through. There might be seeding costs, right? If you want to top dress some seed, or if, some people add fertilizer of some kind, or manure spreading or something. But those are the main five that I work with usually on that labor and equipment cost is usually the biggest one.
And your land rent cost is driven by grain farmers? You're competing with them, or?
Division probably driven by farmers themselves, not necessarily grain farmers. We're on the edge of the black soil zone. So if I was to go east any farther, grain farmers are my biggest competition. But going west, it's just the local, beef farmer who, might have a little bit of cropland, or they have a little bit of hay land they've worked up. But I'm mostly in the gray wooded soil zone. So my land rent's anywhere from, the bush land is maybe $5 to $10 an acre, and the highest I think I pay is $50 to $60 an acre for good land. So
yeah, wow. And do you like the bush paddock that you were talking about that you improved over time? Is that was that something that you accomplished with cows alone? Was the pushing back the bush, or how did you approach that?
Some of the land that I've taken over in the past has had a bunch of willows and stuff growing back up. And, to be able to knock that back, you need to increase your stock density high, and it depends how mature they are. I think the most mature one that I've ever done, I actually used bale grazing, and I would back the bales right into the shrubs that were coming up and plunk the bales, and then the cows would just hammer on them all winter long, right? I mean, easiest way to wreck a forest is leave cows in there all winter, right? They'll rub down every sapling and knock down everything you can. So there's a balance there, though. What is your goal of that forested area, right? If your goal is to maintain it and keep it regenerative, right, keep it sustainable for long term, then I'd probably only maybe graze it once late summer and maintain, because you don't want to knock all those saplings out. But if you've got an area where you want it to be grazable acres or open land, and the saplings are coming back on you, well, then you might have to hit it harder. And a little trick that I'm working on, and I'm not, I can't say that I've had it work positive for me yet, because I just started it. But the soil pH, sorry, not pH. Let me back up. You can delete that part.
Sure.
Whether it is a bacterial dominated soil or a fungal bacteria soil. Okay, that's going to change what's growing in your fields. And I had this area that was growing saplings and rose bushes, and it was just kind of, the landowner was getting concerned. He wanted to go out and mow them all down and get rid of them. So I decided I was going to increase the stock density on it. And one of the tools I've used in the past for fixing land is just deferred grazing. So let it go mature, and then turn the cows out there later and hammer it down. Right. It's the same as that, leave them out there longer in the wintertime and let them hammer it down. Well, Dr. Nicole Masters, talked to her about that, and she got into this bacterial and fungal thing. And what I was doing was kind of backwards to what I wanted. If the shrubs and trees and willows are all growing up, that means you've got a fungal dominated soil. That's what's causing that. If you've got a weedy pasture, well, that's because it's a more bacterial dominated soil. What you want is a 1-to-1, right? Bacterial to fungal, and that's kind of your ideal, forage grazing target. So what was happening was mine was too fungal, and I was stomping down dead plant material, which was causing it to become more fungal, right? Because what I found out from her is that if I wanted it to go back to 1-to-1 from fungal, what I need to do is trample down green plant material, right? And then that will encourage bacteria. So trampling dead plant material encourages fungus. Trampling green plant material encourages bacteria. So depending where you're at is what you want to trample. So we started on that. When we get into those, rosebush willowy areas, then we increase the stock density when it's green and growing. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I have a weedy patch, well, then I might let it go, let it die, and then come in the fall or winter, or even maybe in next spring, and trample that dead plant material down. Yeah. And that'll turn it more to that fungal. So anyway, yeah, that's more about getting rid of willows and trees and saplings and stuff.
Yes, sorry. I had a rabbit trail there, but we're back on track now.
You caught me off guard there.
Nobody else heard that pause because it got edited out, so don't worry about it. What about, so is there a threshold as far as we're going back to the economics and finance and paying yourself? Is there a threshold? Yeah. Is there a threshold that, okay, especially in a custom grazing scenario that you are in, is there a threshold where you say, this is worth it, this is not worth it? Some of those things, or is every place different? It depends. Or is that the answer I'm going to get?
No, it matters. What I come up with is what I call a gross margin ratio. Okay? And I also got a contribution margin ratio. So basically a contribution margin ratio is your contribution margin divided by your gross product, and it comes up with a percentage. So what you need to do is set your own goal, your own benchmark. Okay, so for me, I would like at least a 40% contribution margin ratio on a profit center. So if I've got that, which means basically, so my gross margin ratio is at 50%, my contribution margin ratio is at 40%. So
what's the difference?
Simplify that down.
What makes the difference between gross margin and contribution margin?
Okay, without showing you the whole diagram and you taking the whole school, let me try and do it quickly here. If I make $100, okay, I want 50% of it. So I want $50 to go as a positive gross margin. Okay, so $50 can be costs, right? You're in a cow calf, you're buying hay, you're buying, vaccines, or paying for grass, or whatever it is. 50 cents or $50 of that $100 I want moving forward. From that point, I've got profit center overheads. So any overhead costs that are directly related to the one profit center, I want $10 in that. Okay, so out of that $50 now, there's $10. So now from that original $100 that I have, $50 was in direct costs, $10 was in profit center overheads. That leaves me $40 going forward to cover my business overheads, right? That's not necessarily profit yet. We still have business overheads. But that to me is a benchmark. If every one of my profit centers could throw $40 out of every 100 towards my business overheads, right? And now I've got to manage my business overheads too, which in theory, in a perfect world, maybe that would be $20 out of that 100. Now that leaves me $20 in profit at the end.
Sure.
Okay, out of that $100. So that's a quick scenario without having any visuals. Every $100, I want $50 in cost. And if I can do better than that, great.
Yeah.
But that's my target. $10 in profit center overheads, $20 in business overheads, and $20 in profit. If I can do that, I'm pretty confident that I can have a profitable business.
Yep. And that'd be a 20% return, basically.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Good. Very good. Any other thoughts that you wanted to communicate regarding paying yourself and some of these things?
Yeah. Do I actually pay myself?
Is there a check written from Greener Pastures Ranching to Steve Kenyon?
This is a common one. And the answer is no. When I'm budgeting, yes, you bet. I'm putting my full value in there because I want to make sure that economically we're going ahead. But then when we get into it, you know what? We're on a farm and we can write off a lot of things. And the more things I can write off, the better. The less my personal income tax is, the better, right? And on top of me running a farm where we get all sorts of little perks to another subsidy, I know, even getting farm fuel is a subsidy, right? Your farm insurance is a subsidy that you don't think about.
Sure.
So
you have
anyway,
to have insurance on your house if you didn't have that.
Yeah. So do I pay all of that to me that I budgeted? No, not at all, because I can write stuff off. I also am a writer, and my wife is a videographer in agriculture, and she makes videos for our company and promoting our business and all sorts of things. So
shout out to Paradigm Productions.
Yes, Paradigm Productions. So anywhere we go, it's a business trip. Mm-hmm. Right. So, you know, off the record, if we're going on a holiday somewhere, we make sure we got something planned that we can go to a farm or see something or take some pictures or get some cool video for the next set of B-roll we need for some promotional thing. Or I'm out there brainstorming for an article idea. Right. I went to Jasper and we got an interesting idea about some gravity flow water systems from the waterfall that we saw, right? So again, that's on a financial side now. I'm trying to do my bookkeeping, my accounting as most beneficial for me. So no, do I pay myself a check every month and then I get a big income tax bill at the end of the year? No. I try and write off as much as we possibly can, and as everybody should. Yep. But yes, in my budgeting, you bet I'm charging full rate for everything for what I do.
Very good. Very good. I think we got it covered. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah. I got one more comment that I'd like to make. I know Clay's like me. We're both kind of kids at heart. And don't worry, I'm not going into cartoon movies or anything. You've ever played Monopoly?
Yes, sir.
And as you go past go, you collect $200 for nothing.
Yep.
Right. No reason. Okay. You ever played the farming game?
Yep.
Yeah. Every time you go around Christmas and get to start again, you get a $5,000 bonus from your off-farm job, right? That you're pushing into your business, right? Because now you got to go buy stuff with it. So we've got that off-farm income that's supporting the farming game. Right. Mm-hmm. So not very many people know about this, and I don't promote it very much because it's not a profitable venture for me at all, but I made a board game. Mm-hmm. It's called Greener Pastures Ranching, and you can get it on thegamecrafter.com. They'll print one out. I did all the work behind it, put all of the artwork on the templates, and they can just print you one game and send it out to you. And I usually have a few around that I give out at conferences and stuff. But one of the big things I put in there, you pass go and you get $200. No, that doesn't happen in the Greener Pastures game. Every time you pass any corner, there's 4 corners on a board game. Okay. You have to pay yourself $5,000 in personal wages. That's a cost. Every corner, not just go, all 4 corners. So you have to budget and plan to pay yourself money out of your business, not you get $5,000 at Christmas and you push it into your farm. Right. It's the other way around on my ranch.
Nice.
So it's a mindset change, right? We're trying to push that no, you have to plan for that. If you can't pay yourself at the end of the month, you're out of money, you're done. You lose the game.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway, little different.
You got anything coming up that you would like to promote, or anything you want to share?
All sorts of stuff on the go here. I'm working with the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association. We're building basically an online grazing school. It's free of charge for anybody anywhere. Wow. It's called the Advanced Grazing Systems, and it's about 6 hours worth of course. But that is in association with a on-farm mentorship program that we're building. We're trying to get this promotion out there and getting more people doing this. We're talking about grazing clubs, building them together. We've got some some funding to get this going, right? A little bit more government funding that I just criticized, but this is going in a good direction, in a good, pushing agriculture into the positive regenerative field. So I'm 100% okay with this. And that's, like I said, it's free to anybody, anywhere. They can come to take that. So I think it's on the website is CanadianFGA.ca. So CFGA, but they've got Canadian at the beginning of it. And you go to the programs and projects, I think it is, and look for advanced grazing systems. And the reason I called it that, it's not another name. I know everybody has different terminology for everything. I wanted it to fit all of the different types of grazing. So this is just an advanced grazing, any type of advanced grazing system, whether it's, holistic management or management intensive grazing or intensive cell grazing, or, there's all these different terms out there. Well, I didn't want to make a new term. This is just a generic term. We kind of call it the bronze level, and then you can take it to the gold level wherever you go from there. Sure. But it's the basics. So that's something that we've been working on the last couple of winters here. So
very cool. And that's up and ready to go. People can take that course.
Yep, you bet. It's full bore right now. So we got to upgrade it. We put the first version out, and I know there's a few mistakes in it, little bloopers here that I'm like, I got to fix that. But it's not just as easy as going in there and changing it. So that's our project. The next couple months is going in to fix out all those little bloopers. So, sure. But basically the information is pretty solid in there. So
cool. Yeah, so that'll be linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/275, as well as links to the Greener Pasture Ranching farming game or Greener Pastures ranching game. I'll have a link up there as well, so people go out there and get themselves that and start paying themselves every time they go past a corner. So very good. No, Steve, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Clay. God bless.
Very good stuff there with Steve. Really appreciate his time. He's always got good insights and well thought out ways of communicating what he's thinking about. So I really appreciate him taking the time. Really looking forward to next week on the Working Cows podcast. We're going to be sitting down with Ranching for Profit school instructor. In fact, Shannon Sims and Melinda Sims, both have been guests on the Working Cows podcast, will be teaching the Rapid City School, taking place January 22nd through the 28th. And so if you're interested in that, go to ranchingforprofit.com and get in on that. But we're going to talk to Shannon Sims next week on the Working Cows podcast about the importance of having hobbies away from the ranch, the importance of physical exercise, and some of the things that he learned in the process of training for a marathon that he recently ran. So encourage you to come back next week for another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.